As we've discussed previously in the course, insects and other arthropods provide many important ecosystem services and products that are of value to humans. Arthropods fulfill critical roles in pollination, decomposition, pest control, and even seed dispersal. Some of these, such as the decomposition and recycling of dead matter and waste, are services that most people happily leave to the insects. Insects also provide many commercial products that are widely used by people. We've already discussed the global demand for honey and other bee products like beeswax, pollen, and royal jelly. Later in this module, we'll explore the use of a bee product that's not so sweet, bee venom. Other arthropod-derived products used by humans include textiles and dyes. Silk, in particular, played a significant historical role in trade and foreign relations between the East and the West. Since the beginning of sericulture in China in approximately 2700 BC, silk has been a lucrative trading product. As the quality of silk production and weaving continued to improve, the silk trade became so lucrative that the Silk Road was established during the Han Dynasty around the year 130 BC. This ancient network of trade routes connected China, India, Persia, Arabia, and Europe. Silk is a protein secretion produced by arthropods that is externally spun into fibers, resulting in a strong material used to build structures such as cocoons and webs. The natural protein fiber used by humans to make silk textiles is produced by the mulberry silkworm, Bombyx mori. Although the native range of the silkworm in the wild historically included most of Asia, it has been so strongly domesticated for cultivation to produce silk that it's believed all wild populations are extinct. Historically, the demand for silk was very high because the textile is easy to dye and has a soft texture. The demand in modern times is still great. Today, 125,000 tons of silk are produced annually in China and India alone. While silk produced by lepidopterans has been important to the textile industry, spiders produce fibers with great strength and elasticity, which may be of interest for textiles or other industries. By mass, spider silk is stronger than steel, and this strength is maintained at a wide range of temperatures, even below -40 degrees Celsius. What makes silk so interesting is its toughness. Spider silk is elastic and can be stretched 2 to 4 times its length without breaking. Although spider silk has received extensive research attention, its applications to date are limited due to the difficulty of rearing spiders in captivity. Spiders are difficult to rear en masse because they are predators and would eat each other if kept together. Additionally, unlike moths, spiders do not produce convenient structures from which to harvest the silk, as harvesting webs is not yet efficient. In an attempt to solve this problem, the genes to produce spider silk have been inserted into yeast, bacteria, and even goats. To date, experiments with yeast have been the most successful in yielding artificial spider silk. The genetically modified yeast are fed a mixture of sugar and water, which the yeast ferments into silk proteins. The purified and powdered silk protein is mixed with a solvent to form a viscous liquid that is extruded through small holes to form silk fibers. The developers of this technique hope to make this impressive material economically viable at prices similar to naturally produced lepidopteran silk. Products made from artificial spider silk are already available to consumers, although the market is still very small. Although you may only notice the silken webs of spiders in your day-to-day life, many different groups of insects also use silk for different purposes. Let's hear some more about how insect silks are made, harvested, and used by humans from our local expert on silk, Mary Glasper.
My name is Mary Glasper, and I've just finished my master's degree in textile science in the Department of Human Ecology at the University of Alberta. We are currently sitting in a textile science lab, which is used for both research as well as undergraduate laboratories. So my research involved investigating the silk produced by the greater wax moth Galeria melanella. It hasn't been investigated as a source of textile fiber before, but it has really interesting mechanical properties, and so I wanted to investigate that silk from a textile science perspective. So it's interesting because entomology and textiles have always been interests of mine ever since I was a small child. And so I started off in entomology, but I always did hobbies like embroidery and crochet and knitting. And so silk seemed like a very obvious connection between the two. In lepidopterans, silk is actually produced by modified salivary glands. So instead of producing saliva, they produce silk. And so there's a portion of the posterior part of the silk gland produces the structural components of silk, which is what we would call fibroin. And then as it moves through the salivary gland, there's a coating that's applied to the silk called sericin, and then it is extruded through the spinneret, which is located on the insect's labium. So not all insects produce silk, but there are many orders of insects that do. So some examples would be caddisflies, so trichopterans or neuropterans produce silk as part of like their egg stalks. There's also a lot of wasps that produce silk and other orders as well. The uses are varied. So some of them use them, well, lepidopterans use them for protection when they're pupating. Some use, predominantly it's used for pupation. Sometimes it's used for protection. So like in caddisflies, they create these little like sleeping bags for themselves, I like to call it, portable houses that they walk around with and incorporate pebbles into that structure. Some of them use them for egg protection. And spiders use it, spiderlings use them to fly away and disperse and to create webs for capturing prey. There's a lot of different uses for silk. What's interesting about Galeria is that unlike other lepidopterans who only predominantly produce silk just to make a cocoon that protects the pupa, they actually use it to construct feeding tubes within the beehive colony where they live. So they have to produce this silk that's both strong and elastic. The vast majority of silk that people use comes from Bombyx mori, the cultivated silkworm. I would say like 95% of the silk that you would see on the market comes from Bombyx. There's another category of silk that's very widely just referred to as tussa silk, but that actually is produced by a number of different species, predominantly Saturniid moths. So those you'll find in some more kind of special textile products that are a bit more like artisanal and boutique. And then there's a huge body of research right now surrounding the applicability of spider silk. Specifically because mulberry silk has been used for thousands of years. So I wasn't personally there when they decided to start using it. But what's interesting about mulberry silk is that it's been selectively bred over thousands of years so that you're effectively selecting for really large quantities of silk in a cocoon structure that's very easy to reel. And so there was promise, someone at some point realized this was something that you could do, and then they've been selectively bred to make that process easier and more efficient over time. For apparel end uses, silk is really desirable because it's very soft, it has a lot of luster, it's very beautiful, and it's also quite expensive, so there's a certain kind of luxury aspect there. So that's kind of historically where silk was really important. In terms of more technical end uses, as I mentioned, silk has a bit more toughness than some tensile fibers. There's as many gaps as there are silk-producing organisms out there, so I think so much research has been focused on Bombyx mori specifically and other textile fiber producing lepidopterans as well as spider silk. But as I mentioned earlier, I mean, you have all kinds of organisms that produce silk, and I think I'm starting to see a bit more interest in other organisms that produce silk, and I think there's lots of really exciting stuff to be discovered in that way. The big differences between spiders and caterpillars in terms of the silk they produce is that spiders can produce all kinds of different silk, like 7 or 9 different kinds of silk that are each tailored to a specific need. So you have spiders, they can create what we would call dragline silk, which are kind of the anchoring threads when they're building a web. They have adhesive silk for prey capture. They have types of silk that contain their egg sacs, and each one has a different type of gland that produces these silks. But with lepidopterans, they just have the modified salivary glands, and that's all they produce. I have to admit, I really enjoy visual predators, so like mantids especially, I love. But I just think they're all really cool.
Insects and insect products are not only used to produce fibers, but natural dyes as well. A resurgence of the cochineal carmine dye is attributed to a growing interest in natural dyes. While this dye was traditionally used to color fabrics, its modern usage has shifted to use as food coloring. It is made from cochineal scale insects. The insects are collected, dried, and crushed to produce a natural powdered dye. While inclusion of insects into North American diets through the use of this dye is harmless and largely unrecognized by consumers, there is still pushback from some consumers on the intentional use of insects as food. Many vegetarians don't eat foods with red dye, and some people are actually allergic to the dye. Natural selection has driven the evolution of advantageous traits and systems that allow arthropods to occupy virtually every niche on Earth. These traits can be integrated into science and technology to aid human society. This process is called biomimicry. Before we explore some examples of biomimicry, let's hear from a researcher at the University of Alberta about insects that have inspired everything from packaging to computer screens.
So my name is Carlos Fiorentino. I have more than one position. I'm finishing my PhD here in human ecology, and I'm also teaching design at the art and design department. I use arthropods in my classes, in my teachings. It has to do with the idea of biomimicry and bio-inspired design. So arthropods are like a huge catalog of possibilities for designers. So I have used it in many projects, class projects, assignments. In particular, arthropods have been studied for different technologies or developing new technologies and new materials based on what you can see in arthropods. In my area, since I'm investigated on structural color, that alone, it involves 4 or 5 different industries that can be affected or that could change the way we do things in the future. And that's only structural color. So if you add to that the different ways arthropods combine materials, the different mechanisms that you see in exoskeletons, or even mechanisms like folding, collapsing, expanding, elasticity, weight. There are so many interesting characteristics from a design perspective that can be explored and can be applied. The most popular is the classic morpho butterfly and the blue butterflies that you see usually in many collections, in many entomology collections and books. So basically there are 2 ways of producing color as far as we know. One is producing color by pigmentation or using pigments in materials. What is key to understand from pigmentation is that there is an exchange of energy right there. Exchange of energy, color is produced, right? While structural color, it doesn't use that principle. The color is produced by, let's put some quotation marks here, information added to the surface at the nanoscale, so very tiny structures, sometimes smaller than many wavelengths, many parts of the spectrum of visible light. So that's the way color is being produced, by playing with light or any, there is no exchange of electrons, which is commonly what happens when you have pigmentation, any kind of ink, dye, or whatever contains pigments. That's the main difference. What you see usually in colors with pigments is colors that decay, that fade out, don't last for too long. The incident light might change the color of the surface, as any surface, but if you keep it safe, there is no exchange of energy and colors will remain, right? That's a good feature from structural colors. They are forever. While pigment colors, they decay and they are not accurate, at least forever. So how sustainable biomimicry is a great question. Not particularly arthropods or structural color, but the whole idea of mimicking nature. To that question, I have another question that might be the answer. What can be more sustainable than nature? So if you are looking for a standard, and everything that is around us and is alive have survived for almost 4 billion years. So that's a long process of research and development till you get what you get. There is a lot around computing and robotics and the way robots communicate, but also the ways some mechanism can be coordinated, mimicking the way insects communicate too. This has to do a lot with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So is going into that direction, right? Observing and learning from insects how to perform different tasks with robots and artificial intelligence. This museum, the Strickland Museum, with my class, once a year with one of my classes for a specific assignment that is about packaging. So they observe, those mechanisms that I mentioned earlier, folding, collapsing, and structures in general to inspire different solutions for packaging. So that alone is another entry point, right? So design students are very interested in this. Since I was very little, I feel very attracted to the ladybugs and or similar beetles, right? Because those bugs are bugs that you want to touch and you want to just give your hand to just crawl and go around. I don't do the same with cockroaches or tarantulas, for instance, but ladybugs are kind of, oh, that's my bug. Yeah. That could be my favorite, yeah.
Insects often inspire robotic engineers because they thrive in many environments and have complex behaviors. In addition, both robots and insects have an exoskeleton. In this course, we have learned about locomotory mechanisms, learning and memory, communication, and the cooperative behavior of insects. Insect-inspired robotics aim to integrate this anatomy, behavior, and physiology with robot design and construction. As you may remember from Module 4, insects have some pretty remarkable locomotory adaptations that enable movement in ways that humans still haven't been able to fully replicate. The many modes of locomotion exhibited by insects may have useful applications in robotics, ranging from exploration to dangerous industrial tasks, surveillance, and reconnaissance. For example, robots used in search and rescue need to cover large areas of ground with enough precision to access tight spaces in search of survivors. That sounds like a job for an insect, or an insect-inspired robot. When it comes to the exploration of biologically inspired approaches to robotics, we can start with walking. Insects walk with a variety of leg movements and gaits at varying speeds. Though one thing remains constant: the center of gravity is maintained at the center of mass. Such stable gaits are achieved through cooperative interactions among the neuromuscular components in insect legs. The first hexapod robot, built in 1991, was inspired by this kind of distributed neural network control. The robot weighed approximately 1 kilogram, measured 50 centimeters by 30 centimeters, and could move at an average speed of 6.4 centimeters per second. Through the years, the construction of such insect-inspired robots has continued to improve. Today, robotic insects are capable of navigating rough, uneven terrain and their manner of movement is still derived from arthropod inspirations. Flying insects are a source of inspiration for engineers who design small, autonomous flying robots. The intent is to use these flight-capable robots in rescue and reconnaissance operations in places that are unsafe for human access, such as battlefields or collapsed structures and rubble. Unfortunately, a small, flight-capable robot cannot be designed by simply shrinking an airplane. This is because the aerodynamics of flight differ with size. Strong and agile insect flyers, like flies, are good models for the design of robots that require fast and precise flight. As we discussed in Module 4, insect flight is complex. Sensory organs monitor surrounding features and perceive motion. Flight musculature must be powerful enough to move the wings, yet sensitive enough to deal with unsteady aerodynamics. The nervous system coordinates insect motion at high speeds in dynamic situations while simultaneously navigating a three-dimensional space. These biological and physiological mechanisms of insect flight have long been of interest to engineers in an attempt to build better flying robots. In 2008, scientists at Harvard University successfully developed a small flying robot inspired by flies. The robot weighed around 60 milligrams and had the same primary mechanical flight components as an actual fly. Flying insects have inspired many other robots as well. Robot form, structure, and maneuverability in the air have all been modeled from flying insects. An understanding of flight mechanisms in strong and agile insect flyers is also applied to improve the capabilities of flying robots. Even when the robots differ structurally from insects, the physics of insect flight can still be applied. For example, a robot developed in 2018 mimics many insects with a four-winged design, but it was designed to mimic the movement and maneuverability of fruit flies. The next step for flying robots would be to enable coordinated movement of swarms of robots to complete complex tasks, such as search and rescue operations, exploring hazardous environments, building inspections, and even planetary exploration. The possibilities are endless. Insect eyes have also inspired advances in robotics. The ommatidia of insect compound eyes have inspired artificial eyes used by drones for the detection of fast movement. The basic component of these cameras uses a lens over a glass stack that directs light onto a photosensitive silicon chip. Pigmented sidewalls surrounding the lens allow only light rays refracted by the lens to enter. This is the same way that light enters ommatidia in a compound eye. These cameras can detect high-speed motion even in dim environments. The small size of the devices, weighing a mere 2 milligrams, promotes their use on small or flexible robots without impacting the mechanical properties of the robot. These small, lightweight cameras can be used on small flying drones, medical endoscopes, in collision warning systems, or for a variety of other purposes. The inspiration that humans obtain from insects can reach great heights, quite literally when it comes to skyscrapers. Take the Eastgate Center in Harare, Zimbabwe, for example, a large office and shopping mall complex designed using biomimicry principles. This energy-efficient green structure was designed based on African termite mound structural features. By using a termite mound for inspiration, engineers managed to create an architectural structure that does not require artificial heating or cooling systems. In fact, temperature regulation within the structure uses less than 10% of the energy of a conventional building of its size. This is because temperatures within the building are efficiently regulated by passive air exchange from the structure itself. Air is drawn in by fans on the first floor and either warmed or cooled by the mass of the building. The air is then directed into the floors and offices before it eventually exits the top of the building via chimneys. This design saves on air conditioning and heating costs, which translates into a 20% lower rate than market averages for tenants in the building. The Eastgate Center is a symbol of the possibilities of biomimicry. Temperature regulation is not the only ecological problem solved by insects before humans. Our next example of biomimicry has to do with the capture of water out of thin air. This insect-inspired technology has important life-saving implications as droughts become more frequent and severe under climate change. The Namib Desert in Africa is considered the oldest desert in the world and has experienced arid or semi-arid conditions for at least 55 million years. It contains some of the world's driest regions, yet it is not a lifeless, sandy stretch of land. Instead, this place is home to amazing darkling beetles, insects that can collect water from air. Some species of darkling beetles have special elytra that are covered in tiny bumps and grooves. Water vapor condenses and collects on these elytral structures from mist and ocean fog blown inland by morning winds. By climbing to the top of sand dunes and positioning themselves into the foggy wind, the elytra of darkling beetles draw water from the atmosphere through condensation. The water droplets funnel downward to the beetles' mouths for the insects to drink. Researchers are currently studying the microstructures on darkling beetle elytra. The goal is to apply an understanding of these microstructures to create water-collecting surfaces or containers. In this way, we may be able to develop technologies like self-filling water bottles. Interestingly enough, the microstructures of the darkling beetle elytra also have antifreeze properties that inhibit ice formation. This knowledge may be useful in the aerospace industry as a method to prevent frost formation on airplanes. Insects not only inspire technological innovations, but are sometimes part of the technology itself. Honeybees have been used in order to sniff out illegal substances like drugs and explosives. Although dogs and bees both share an exceptional sense of smell, bees take less time to train than dogs. It typically takes only 2 days to train bees to respond to specific smells, while it takes months to train a dog. The bees are contained in capsules, in which they're conditioned to associate a sugary reward with certain odors. Once trained, the bees stick out their tongue in the presence of the odors, even when there is no reward in sight. The bee capsules are used in a handheld machine that detects when they respond to specific odors. These bee sniffers are more accurate and more than 10 times as sensitive as electronic noses. Compared to sniffer dogs, bees are cheap and easy to train, and may be considered more expendable in dangerous scenarios where it may be risky to use a highly trained dog. These sniffing devices have also been developed with some species of moths and parasitoid wasps. Insects have also made beneficial contributions to medicine. Before the development of modern drugs and procedures, many cultures experimented with insect-based remedies to treat human diseases and injuries. For instance, the exoskeletons left by cicadas after a molt have been unsuccessfully applied to treat tetanus. Nonetheless, some insects do have useful medical applications, and several insect-based treatments have been developed and approved as remedies against human ailments. A common medicinal use of insects, both historically and in modern medicine, comes from bees. Apitherapy refers to the use of any bee product for medicinal purposes. Honey is the most widely used insect product across the globe for treating various forms of infections, and is one of the most common home remedies for a sore throat. Honey has often been applied as a topical treatment for infections because of its antimicrobial properties, which are due to its high sugar-to-water content ratio. More surprisingly, compounds from the venom of bee stings may also have medicinal uses because, counterintuitively, they can have anti-inflammatory properties. Because of this, bee venom could potentially be effective against arthritic pain and other inflammatory issues. Bee venom is also increasingly used in cosmetic products, with the idea that it will increase circulation in the skin or lips to result in a plumped and firmed look. However, the use of bee stings for medicinal purposes is controversial, and its effectiveness still needs to be medically proven. The dangers of using bee venom on human patients include the possibility that someone will experience an allergic reaction, which can include significant swelling or anaphylactic shock. Scientists are currently studying venoms of other arthropods as well, such as scorpions and spiders. Spider venom has recently come to light as a potential new insecticide. The genes that encode the venom may be genetically encoded into plants, and have even been found to compound the effects of Bt endotoxin in Bt transgenic crops. Scorpions and their venom have been used in traditional medicines in Central America, Africa, and Asia for centuries. Although scorpion venom can be lethal, some of its chemical components may have beneficial pharmacological functions. Venom composition varies by scorpion species and with diet and environmental factors. Some factors, such as diet, may be manipulated to increase the quality or quantity of venom available for research and eventually treatments. Multiple compounds from scorpion venom are currently under study as potential treatments for rheumatoid arthritis, microbial infections, and even cancer. Venom is not the only arthropod-associated tool used in medicinal applications. Live maggots have actually been an important tool in wound care for centuries. Maggot therapy has been documented in cultures such as the Mayans of Central America and the indigenous peoples of Australia and Myanmar. The maggots of some species of flies specialize to feed only on dead tissue, leaving the living tissue to grow and heal. This diet specialization makes these maggots particularly useful for cleaning neglected or extensive human wounds in which necrotic tissues must be removed to promote healing. The maggots are sterilized before being introduced into the wound, and their development is carefully monitored. Maggots not only consume dead tissue, but also produce compounds that kill pathogenic microbes and promote wound healing. The widespread availability of penicillin and other antibiotics after the 1940s resulted in a decline in the use of maggots in wound care. Nonetheless, maggot therapy has made a comeback in modern medicine, particularly for the treatment of antibiotic-resistant infections or infections involving flesh-eating bacteria, which don't respond well to standard treatments. In these cases, the maggots physically remove the pathogenic bacteria when current drug therapies cannot. Despite the ick factor associated with maggots, the simplicity, safety, and efficacy of maggot therapy has resulted in an increase in its use worldwide in recent years. This is because there are several advantages to maggot therapy. For one, the risk of complications is low, and it requires less antibiotic use, which can be bad for long-term patient health. Maggot therapy is also a cheaper alternative to expensive and painful tissue removal surgery, which many people may not be able to afford or tolerate. Finally, wounds treated with maggot therapy usually heal rapidly and with less scarring than with other methods. As a medical tool, the use of maggot therapy has been streamlined for maximum efficiency and safety. Insects have inspired many advances in genetic research. In fact, the fruit fly Drosophila melanogaster was one of the first model organisms used for genetic research in the early 1900s. Since then, multiple scientists have won Nobel Prizes in medicine for research on this insect. Researchers have bred fruit flies to study the effects of inbreeding, Mendel's laws of heredity, mutation, and other genetic phenomena. While most people wouldn't think of a fruit fly as particularly analogous to humans, the genome of the commonly studied fruit fly Drosophila melanogaster matches approximately 60% of human genes and up to 75% of human disease-causing genes. Furthermore, their short generation time, high fecundity, and ease of rearing make them excellent model organisms for genetic studies. Changes in the genome can be rapidly induced and observed through several generations without waiting for the development of a long-lived organism. Insects are important sources of inspiration in scientific and technological breakthroughs. Today, we continue to learn from these diverse and incredible animals. In the next video, we focus on the topic of entomophagy, the consumption of insects in human diets. While this may be disturbing to some of our learners, we encourage you to watch the next video with an open mind as we discuss the potential benefits of entomophagy.